Members and staff are participating virtually today. We are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city website and also linked on the Noise Advisory Board page. For those of you that are with us today, thank you and welcome. I will now go through and introduce all the board members who will be participating virtually. Please make sure to mute your microphones if you are not speaking. And when you have a question or would like to speak, please unmute your microphone. Board members, as I call your name, please acknowledge your presence. Charles Beck.
Here.
Rick Freeman.
Here.
James Corbin Harwood. Not present. Anoop Krishan. Not present. Carmelo Papilonio.
Here.
Jeff Santiago.
Here.
And Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Hello.
Also with us today are several staff members, Haley Mahoney.
Hello.
Ben Woody.
Good afternoon.
Granier Miser.
Good afternoon.
And Chris Collins.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks for everyone for being here today. So our first order is to get an approval of the minutes from the May 9th meeting. Hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to take a look at those. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the May 9th meeting?
I'd like to set a motion to approve those minutes.
Thank you, Jeff. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Okay, roll call for everyone else. Charles Beck.
Yay.
Rick Freeman.
Yay.
And for myself, yay. And I believe that is everyone that is present on the call. So motion is approved for the May 9th minutes. Moving on to our next agenda item is the staff report. Has everyone had an opportunity to take a look at the staff report? Okay, great. Are there any questions about the staff report?
Just one note, Jessica, that stood out at me is knowing that there is at least a bug in the system as far as capturing address and versus phone number. It shows that about 33% of the tallied numbers don't have an address, phone number, etc. I'm hopeful that the staff is looking into fixing that, because that may account for why we're getting skewed statistics that things are not able to be followed up on because they don't have address or phone number. And what's actually happening, because we went through it 3 times personally, myself, my wife, is that when you go in and put your address in, it picks up your phone number. It doesn't pick up your address. So it doesn't know where the source of the complaint is coming from. It knows where the source of the noise is, which is obvious. But they should fix that, because we want to get as accurate a statistic as possible.
Are you talking about the JOT form?
Yeah, the JOT form.
Okay, so what you're saying is when people put their address in, it auto-populates their phone number to the...
Correct.
Okay. Huh.
So I would just like to address that, if I may, Jessica, just as a response. So most of those unknowns, Charlie, are from APD calls. They're not coming through our job form, just to clarify that. I did correspond with IT about that. I would recommend clearing your history on that browser, is what they advised me. I've tried a couple of trial runs on myself, and it seemed to go through just fine. So they had recommended perhaps clearing your history to see if it will reset it. But I have put in a work order with IT to actually look into that. We haven't had any other issues with it, but the ones that were referred to in the staff report are actually ones that have come to us from APD. And that's kind of a consistent issue of not having contact information. But I appreciate your feedback on the job form very much, because if it wasn't pointed out, we would have no way to know that. So thank you.
As long as someone checks on it, I think we just,
Sure.
because
Yeah,
most
yeah.
people would not know to clear browsers before they issue a complaint.
Yeah, we've troubleshotted a lot on our end, and it's an issue of an autofill situation. So if you use autofill, it will autofill that there, and there's no way for us to fix that on our end.
That was all I had, Jessica.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. I just have a quick question. I know thanks for getting this information together, by the way, about the amount of apartment units. Is that now, do we feel like is that a full count are all multifamily units accounted for now in that number, this 10,785? Either
You're
Grania.
muted.
Sorry about that.
Sorry if I'm unmuted. Sorry, I'll be happy to address that. Unfortunately, that is not a final number. So
Okay.
the 57 represents the complex property management that we have contact with, that we have a property manager that we work with. Daniel went back and he does quarterly check-in with them. They do tend to have quite a turnover of staff. So we had decided to kind of check in with them fairly frequently, make sure we've got the right person, we still have the right contact information. And as part of that check-in, he did ask each one of those how many units they have on their complex. So that just represents what we have and we are working with. There are many complexes that we've never had contact with that either don't have noise issues that are coming to us or that are managing them themselves. So we don't have any contact information with those people. So that 57 different apartment complexes represents the people we have had contact with, we have relationships with, and that's the total from those 57.
Okay, great. Wow, that's a lot. So it's at least that. Okay.
Right, and probably more, yes.
Yeah.
Definitely more. And then the other thing was just that we had the update with multifamily was just that new poster that we had worked with. We had got approval from management at the Housing Authority to issue those, and we updated them and issued them to all the Housing Authority properties, and actually went just last month to meet a couple of new managers at some new Housing Authority properties, and we're really happy to see them hanging in the lobby. So that's good. So they are getting that message out to their residents.
Okay, great. Any other questions from the board on the staff report? No? Okay. Moving on to old business, working group update, sound mitigation. So a group of us got together. That was myself, Carmelo, Jeff, and Granier to work on basically creating a document that everybody has been sent, that hopefully you've had an opportunity to take a look at, with just some good neighbor sound mitigation tips. Our thinking was to, try and inform people of both things that they can do to be proactive, from just be talking to their neighbors to businesses thinking about how they set up their amplification and where it's facing and how to get staff involved. So we put this together for everybody to take a look at. So I'd love to hear some feedback from some of the board members into how you think this best represents what we're trying to do.
Jessica, this is Charlie. I think a couple of things. One is that I noticed in here, and it was something that was recommended a while back, pointing speakers downward or into the venue as opposed to broadcasting or channeling them up a street like Sawyer Avenue in the case of the outdoor venue on Cox, I think is helpful. I did send to you and Carmelo some information on sound absorbing sound barriers that seem to have worked in some other parts of the United States. Because I think unless there is some absorption put in place that is effective, and we can take some of these techniques of, downward and inward sort of projection of sound, that's about the only thing that I know is going to, change the tonality. I know it was outside the period that was reported on here, but we were sent, I guess, by city staff, the June 8th detail, and those ratcheted up between 3 p.m. and 9 p.m. over the mid 80s, and some spiked into the hundreds. That's just too loud. So something's got to be done in order to tamp that down a bit.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's, we were trying to find a balance of, as we put in here for businesses with indoor and outdoor music, the placing barriers between your venue and your neighbors, coming up with a couple of, a number of different options without getting too detailed, right? Because we're trying to keep this something that was concise, that then, we wanted to have an opportunity for people to reach out to us if they wanted to explore this a little bit further, but also making it so as we're inundated with information, being like, okay, here's some very simple things that you can do. And it's a start, and we can get more detailed as people, if people want us to. We're trying to get them to be, this is essentially about being proactive to a certain extent, to sort of head things off at the pass. So hopefully, and I got that information from you, thank you. So hopefully this will be something that we can continue to help inform people and support people on.
Thanks.
Rick?
So I have one sort of wording issue. This statement, be reasonable when living in a dense and diverse city, a certain level of noise should be expected. The charter of this group is to reduce excessive noise, so that should be changed in some way to reference the decibel limits or the nuisance limits or whatever is currently in writing. Because as it's written, it sort of implies you don't really pay attention to the ordinance, just expect it to be noisy because of where you live.
Could I respond to that?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, I was hoping my mic could be heard. Yeah, it's Rick, I think that's important. The bottom line is, like you said, to just inform people and to have specifics and to have it kind of like a enclosed system of information where it's like, hey, if you think this is a problem, let's refer to the decibel ordinance and everything like that. So it's 100% the case that that's important. But from what I understand, the project of these tips were kind of to be accessible to the average civilian person who's not familiar with how decibels work, because I think as we talked about in previous meetings, they work on a logarithmic scale, and it's quite difficult without people having a chart in front of them and ballparking it like, I'm comparing this to the sound of a car, a truck, or a dog, or a conversation. It gets a little tricky. So what I'm getting at is just, we wanted these to be not technical tips in this particular section, and this would just be general guidelines, kind of like golden rule approaches, so that people can first be exposed to deepen their consideration and understanding of like the dynamics of sound without throwing a bunch of like numbers and metric readings at them. But that being said, if they get through all this and they're still dissatisfied, the ordinance is still going to be available for them to reference and check out. And then they can, if they don't understand decibel scales, they can simply, I suppose, look it up, but we just wanted this extra reference there to be more accessible.
So let me respond to that. I admire the goal. When I read this, it would discourage a person who is having a noise problem from saying anything. Read it from a person whose kids can't go to sleep because there's a bunch of noise. Hey, you're in a dense and diverse city. You know, you should expect that noise. I don't think that's appropriate for this committee to put that kind of potential negative barrier in the way of citizens trying to understand what their rights are.
Yeah, I totally understand, and maybe we can work together on some sort of rephrasing, but not so much to push back, but to just play a clarifying role in why we worded it like that. It's simply to be put there as be reasonable, because Granier and Daniel have like articulated and pointed out so many times that the data and there's countless stories of complaints which did not indeed exceed ordinance, and then there's repeat offenders, and then there's other problems where noise complaints get used as a proxy for some other grievance between neighbors or establishments or et cetera, if you will. But it's simply there to point out an inevitability. Like, it is a fact that a certain level of noise should be expected. We live under Earth's atmosphere in this medium of hydrogen and oxygen. There's going to be sounds and everything. We just want people to better understand that. It's not in any way throwing our hands up. And I think that there's a difference between reducing the overall noise and reducing overall agitation and any eagerness to complain. They're two very different things. And the approach we took is it's just the job of the board of experts, us, to craft a nuanced approach to better understand this. But yeah, like I said, that the working group we got with Granier and Daniel, and we had acoustic and sound professionals and the people in the field, and we just agreed on the benefits of acknowledging that this is some sort of inevitability. It in no way discourages. We're not trying to, with our wording, that is. We would never want to do that, of course. So otherwise, we just wouldn't make the webpage. We'd say tough luck, but sorry. But no, we just wanted to state that as a fact rather than a discouraging remark. And our approach is that if neighbors can develop a more nuanced understanding of just how noise works, we would see an effect in the data of like a cut down on repeat noise complaints and other potentially problematic types of complaints overall. But it also increases civility and accountability as we see it. But like I said, if we run this by people and there is a consensus that is a discouraging way of wording it, we can totally jump into it and find a different way. But we just wanted to state the simple fact that like noise is going to be there. Here's how we can navigate it in a civil way that increases neighborly accountability. That's really the sentiment that we were kind of going after.
Charlie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think a couple of things, have come to mind for me. One is, when I went back and looked at the state statutes, and I know the municipalities have veered from those, to simplify, using Carmela's example, it says that noise should not be clearly audible outside of 66 feet from the source of it. And clearly, I live 550 feet from an outdoor venue. I can hear it in my living room with noise canceling headphones on. I'm curious, when Maury Blue builds the 300, I call them dorm rooms or micro housing units on Aston and Hilliard Flats, which they're asking for city money to basically be a land grant for, which I am not particularly fond of either. We're going to have more of a density and concentration less than 500 feet away from a venue. And in fact, today, I'm sitting in Michigan because I didn't want to sit through 13 concerts in 30 days. It was not something that I felt I wanted to do. It cost me $500 to board my cat, but It just from where I sit, it goes back to what we talked about around duration and volume and frequency. And it feels like we're violating that as a city. And I put this at their doorstep because they approved this thing. I look at the exceedance permit, as I always have. I think it's unnecessary. If we think 72 is the top limit for CBD during the day, why are we going to subject the population for 8 hours at a pop, for better than half the month of June to 85 or 100? And I've got the charts that were sent to me by staff. So obviously I have a perspective on it that's probably different than most, but I live it. I am sitting there, when granted, Rabbit curtails at 10 o'clock, but then Ben's tune-up fires up at 10 and goes until they're ready to close. So it just seems to be constant from the time they do the warm-ups and the sound testing and the mini concerts until they get to the big concerts. And I have always said it's the amplified noise that is the problem. Because I hear buskers from time to time walking the streets. We get the motorcyclists that decide to run up and down Cox Avenue, but at least they come and they go and they get away from us. But that duration is what the big, in my mind, challenge is.
Charlie, I hear you. Just in terms of staying on track for this being a good neighbor and sound mitigation tips, is there something from this document that does not sit well with you based on your experiences?
I think, Jessica, in context, what bad happens to someone for not being a good neighbor? Is there any type of penalty for them not doing this? And you'll find I'm kind of black and white on things like this as opposed to gray area.
Right.
So in general, it wouldn't have been my first choice. But, I think some elements of it, maybe to Rick's point, being tightened up a bit might get us to a place that is mutually agreeable.
Okay. Well, and the whole point of this was to, the whole point of having Grenier and Daniel is that there are consequences for people who are not within the ordinance, right? And so this is, for us, was trying to create something that was prior to getting to that point of like, what are some things that we can do that can make, one, either less complaints from getting people more informed, or two, helping people to be proactive and making some changes to their businesses. Or even, some of this goes pretty basic neighbor to neighbor, as we see most of the complaints are from residential areas of, contacting your neighbors, be proactive, that's why we have this, if you're planning a party, playing an instrument, cutting down a tree, those sort of things. Making sure that you reach out ahead of time. Being respectful, asking your neighbor to turn, if somebody asks you to turn your music down, be considerate and oblige. So, this was meant to be much more of a more basic understanding in basically just a introductory getting information out of how people can do better and be better neighbors. So I hear you. I feel like the things that we're going to get into a little bit later are going to definitely be able to give us more information to be able to see where things are with decibel levels and how that's working for the city. But I think we all, realize that, as you just said, things are just ramping up. So we need more data in order to figure out get more information on that. Rick, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, a couple of things. We're all trying to do the best we know how to do. And so we're making certain assumptions. One of the assumptions that I just heard being made is that, assumption is the wrong word. Data has been presented that says we're getting recurring complaints when indeed the measurements are taken appropriately, the sound source is not in violation. Okay, take that as fact. What can be the cause of that? Can be lack of a good neighbor policy to ask people to think about this differently. It can be that people are still experiencing pain with the decibel levels that are currently set. So I don't think I buy into that it's the board's responsibility at this stage to be recommending that complainants are not doing the right thing. Citizens have a right to complain regardless of what the ordinance says. Our job, as we get to the agenda, is to go figure out why they continue to complain. So that's that part. Second part, in preparation for my agenda item today, I spent 45 minutes on the phone with Dawa Hitch, the leader of CAPE, which I can no longer remember what it stands for. And I got a really good sense for how concerned CAPE is about us communicating to the public in any way that sets expectations that the city can't live up to. So I think this document needs to be audited by CAPE before it goes into any publication. Because she basically said to me that in an effort to try to understand if the decibel limits are working effectively, I don't mean that by an enforcement. I mean whether the numbers that City Council has set are in fact protecting the population in an appropriate way. She'd be very uncomfortable with our future working group even putting a survey out without CAPE getting in on that. So maybe this should go through that cycle so that we don't get, that there's not some misunderstanding in the public that's going to cause the communications group in the city to have heartburn.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I don't think we had any. No one was planning to put anything out without it having to go through the city first. I mean, I think we had talked about that with Haley, and that had been made pretty clear that anything that was to be put out would have to be cleared by the city. So, and also I just want to say that, at no point, with creating this document, it's like, I feel like you're looking at it through the lens of like, we're telling people not to complain. By no means is that what this was meant to be. It was us just trying to give some things of like, being reasonable. I mean, we've all been in that position where we've all been on the receiving side of noise, and it's not an enjoyable experience. I mean, I have my neighbor started having her lawn service started at 7:15 this morning. Not necessarily enjoyable for me as I'm trying to like get my morning started, but there's a give and a take between like me going and speaking to her first about that versus that's being reasonable, right? Versus me automatically calling in a complaint. Whereas if I can address this with somebody that I already know ahead of time, this is more of what we were looking at in terms of we want people to be able to feel like they can speak freely when there's an issue. But I think the other part of that is also recognizing and understanding from seeing that there are some trends where people are basically do make calls that are not necessarily, there's some other point, as like Carmela brought up, there's some other issue that's happening. Somebody's upset with a neighbor over something else, and this is how they're getting back to them, or there's been issues of people making noise complaints that, are making continuous complaints when, they have to investigate them. And it's always, it's a somewhat of an innocent until proven guilty sort of thing. Right. So it's, by no means were we trying to be like, hey, don't make a complaint. If you have excessive noise, and then by all means make a complaint, but also, be reasonable. So I just wanted to point that out as just the last thing we want to do is make people in the community feel like they can't speak out when they have an issue. It's just a matter of taking a look and putting that into perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it sounds like we're definitely going to need to spend some more time on this. And I think
Yeah, we
I
can go
agree-
over that part. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I agree with you, Rick. I mean, I think definitely we should bring it to CAPE and have them take a look at it and just get it, another perspective, right? Because we're all so close to this in a certain form or fashion, right? Wherever you sit with this. So it might be nice to have that outside perspective to take a look at it and give us their thoughts on it.
I also just want to say, because we are a working group and we're kind of presenting this to the larger group, we wouldn't ever want to overstep, so to say. So we are trying to present this in a way that's sensitive to all interpretations and all experiences. Charlie, I can only empathize with the situation. I believe we all have dealt with loud neighbors and everything, and I can only empathize. And it's a real issue that we should address. But just to go back and reiterate and bounce off of what Jessica was saying really quick, nowhere in this did we want it to say, nor does it say that we want to discourage or prevent complaints, like Jessica was saying, or deny the rights of people to complain. Everyone has the right to, and that's why this is there in the first place. It's just a preliminary introduction to provide more information for those who are potentially interested in filing one. But there does seem to be two separate issues, which I believe both are equally important, and we should hash them out. And there's the decibel limits as part of the ordinance and its efficacy, and then there's the good neighbor, conscious neighbor preliminary information that we're just trying to craft here in a way that's sensitive to all the dynamics that go into having a neighbor. And just our goal again just was to increase the interpersonal understanding and accountability with the neighbors, especially for the largest culprit in the complaints, which is residential and neighbor complaints. That's what one of our targets was in that particular section. That's really, to clarify, that's where our heads were at. And it's shown to be effective that when you go out there and you talk to them on their terms and you approach people with all the information with complete transparency, that it does have an effect. And increasing this understanding and that effect has an inverse effect on the future complaints and future issues too. So that's why we were trying to kind of target that main area of complaints with that to clarify. Yeah.
Go ahead, Rick.
So just maybe a recommendation for the next round. I wish the whole noise scenario was a lot simpler than it is, but it's horrifyingly complex. Maybe just think about two versions of this document. One for multifamily neighbors, because the decibel game doesn't come into play at all there, right? That's 100% nuisance driven. And the wording you might find that you can make wording that's more meaningful to an apartment dweller who's feeling noise from the person who lives above them or next to them, or people running down the hall or whatever it is. And then the separate version for, let's say, single family or people whose noise comes from outside their building, where the decibel limits, that's why they exist. When people, single family homes or condominiums are in the CBD or near commercial businesses, that, you could tweak this a little bit to face that situation. Because I think, if I understand stats right from Grania and team, the vast majority of resident to resident complaints, vast majority come from multifamily. And her head's going up and down. So the smaller group, smaller number it's a building or business away from me that's creating the sound that I'm complaining about. And the dynamics there are a little bit different, right? It's a resident approaching a business person as opposed to a resident approaching somebody that they have to live above, below, or next to. So the good neighbor stuff might work out a little bit differently. And if you decide to do that and you're trying to give a guideline that doesn't require all the technical mumbo jumbo, which I really appreciate, there are, roughly speaking, there are 100 charts online that translate decibels into typical sounds. You know, sound of a vacuum cleaner is 75 decibels. Standard conversation is about 60 decibels. So if you want to make a point without bringing the math in, what you could say is, if the sound level you're hearing is above conversational level, then you probably got a problem, you know? So instead of making somebody understand what 58 decibel sounds like, you can use any of those sources in order to give them some other kind of level that could help them be a good neighbor. And if it's quieter than the conversation they're having with their husband on their back deck, then it's not a violation. Just a couple of points might help you.
Thanks, Rick. And I see Haley putting the agenda up so we stay on schedule. I appreciate that. Thank you, Haley. Okay, so I think what we'll move on to new business. I think what we'll do is just, in terms of when we get down to talking about the working groups, as this is new working group, I think we'll just revisit continuing to work on this document and go from there. So moving on, is everybody okay with that? Does that sound good to everybody? Okay, cool. So moving on, new business. So, each meeting we've had, we're looking at different part of the ordinance, and there was a breakdown for industrial and commercial non-hospitality for us that was put together. Hopefully everyone had a chance to take a look at that. There's a bunch of slides that goes through the old ordinance, the new ordinance, or I should say the revised ordinance, the process in terms of how things are investigated and resolved, and then goes through the number of complaints that we've gotten from September 15th that the city's gotten until June 2nd. Did everybody have an opportunity to take a look at that? And does anybody have some questions on that for Granier? No questions? Rick, you got a question?
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to look at it. And when I saw the slides, I thought Granier was going to present, so I copped out and didn't read it. Just to be honest, because she's typically these have been presented, so I didn't do my homework, if that's what was expected.
Gotcha.
That's fine.
Okay.
If you have any questions after the fact, Rick, I'm happy. Just shoot me an email. I'm happy to answer them. I would just say, as a 2-minute sort of summary, it's one of those areas. A lot of the complainants have no idea where noise is coming from with industrial noise. So it can be hard to chase them down. We've managed to find quite a few of them. People in general have been really responsive. We've had some people change their business practices in order to resolve issues. So, but there are challenges there. I think I would just say, one of the challenges, lawn equipment is difficult because it's hard to get a minute reading sometimes because it's on and off and on and off. It's random as to when people show up. It's not the same time every week. So that can be difficult. No contact, no source information is something that a third of our complaints came through with that. And there's just not really anything. It's hard to get something kick-started. The one example that we gave in there, I give total kudos to Daniel. He worked really hard on this one. We literally drove up and down Riverside Drive for weeks on end trying to find this complaint, and had the complainant text me when they heard it. Daniel finally found it. He found the operator. He's doing a great job on it. There's some emails in there that I included. And that was one of those ones, but that probably started the end of March, and we really just got a resolution on it sort of the beginning of May. So that just give you an idea of sometimes some industrial noise, particularly in the valley, the river valley there. It's really hard to track it, know where it is. And in this case, this noise was very random too. So, but if you see anything and you've got any questions, I'm happy to, just either email me or give me a call. I'm happy to answer anything else.
Grania, I'm just curious, like, so when you, like, that's an example that you were able to track down, and looking at where you have a third of the complaints you're unable to investigate. Are you finding that the people that did the original complaint are following up and calling you again do they hear it again, as in this case that happened? Or is it kind of,
Right.
most of these are like a one and done sort of thing? They're like, well, I heard it, but now I'm not hearing it again.
A bit of both, Jessica.
Okay.
What we do with this example here in the River Arts District, when I spoke to that gentleman the first time, I asked him to try and keep a record for about a week, and that I would call him back to see if we could determine a pattern with the noise, because this was sometimes happening in the evening, sometimes happening in the morning. He didn't know where it was coming from. And so when then I didn't hear back from him, but then he came back to me a couple of weeks later, and we were actually in the field when he emailed me. So I called him and we went straight down, and we drove up and down River Arts District till we found it. So, and then we went back to his property and took a reading at his house. And then Daniel took it and was able to follow up with the actual business operator. So it's a little bit of both, but we do sometimes have to ask people to try and find a pattern for us, because otherwise it's, the initial complaint in this regard came in as a high-pitched screech in the River Arts District. Like that's really very hard for us to get any traction on, right? So we then, follow up with some questions. I did ask him to try and keep a record of time, so then at least we could actually schedule some time to be in the field if we knew it happens every Tuesday at 9:00. So that there's quite a bit of partnership with the complainant in that regard, because we rely on them to be able to fill in some of these gaps for us. Other times we'll ask that and people will just not know. And they'll just say, I don't know. Sometimes I imagine it may actually be, some DOT late night work that they're hearing, but it's gone the next day and there's no follow-up. It's very hard on some of those. But we do ask the complainant to work with us to try and find a pattern, so we can at least try and get out in the vicinity and locate it.
Gotcha. And I see here you did put on here as well that staff sent out email blast to all the residential and commercial general contractors in the DSD permitting system.
Yes.
That's great.
Those are for the after hours permits for concrete pours. I have put together a package for the contractors that has got a sample letter of what kind of information they have to have in there too. The requirements for how many days they have to notify neighbors, all that kind of stuff. I sent them the zoning map so they can find their neighbors within 500 feet. So we put together a little package for that.
That's great. Any other questions on the industrial and commercial non-hospitality? No? Okay. Thanks for putting that together, Grania.
Sure, and if anyone has any questions after the fact, just pick up the phone, give me a call. I'm happy to help. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention that we are going to be moving to quarterly meetings. So our next meeting will be on September 12th. And I think that while we're going to be going to the quarterly meetings, we're still going to get these staff reports monthly. So the things that all the same information that we've been getting, we're going to continue to get, which is great. And I appreciate that. And this will give an opportunity to have a lot more data to take a look at and see the trends by our next meeting in September. So is there any questions on that? No? Okay. And our last order of new business is some new or revised working groups. So Rick, do you want to talk about working group for decibel levels?
Yeah, so when I look at all the things that are in the ordinance that we should be advising City Council on, I would say that the number one heated debate at the time that the noise ordinance was approved was the decibel levels that should remain in the ordinance. There was one group who advocated for 75 decibel levels kind of across the board, another group that advocated for 45 decibel limits across the board. And I think city staff found a medium in between number to try to make everything go forward. So I feel that we have some responsibility to determine whether it's working and what citizens' view are of the decibel levels and whether they can live with them and be prosperous. So we had a conversation during agenda setting with Grania et al. And we thought the working group would take the burden, that's the wrong word. We would do the work to go speak to either via survey or interviews or whatever the most appropriate method is. We'd go talk to the people who complained. And when measurements were taken, it was found that the decibel levels were within limits as set by the ordinance. And we would try to discover what's the impact on their lives, how do they hear it, where they live, et cetera, to just try to get some background on the results. Staff offered, if we thought it was ultimately something we would want to do, that we could take a meter into the complainant's home and, confirm, as Charlie said, that here are the decibel levels actually heard through their walls or whatever that is, in order to just to get some background information on how citizens feel that they are or are not being effectively protected. And that's the overall goal. Those are the ideas that I alone have. I would be happy to be the coordinator for the working group, but then to pick the brains of the couple of people who'd be willing to participate in this. As I mentioned in the earlier debate, I think it was Haley recommended I talk to CAPE to talk about what we could appropriately do. Where would there be boundaries that would not be appropriate for this group to go off and do on its own? Because I was thinking about surveys or some way to reach out to certain neighborhoods that seem to have a high propensity of complaints, to see if other people have just given up and stopped complaining but are still feeling pain. And that's where I got fairly strong feedback from the leader of CAPE, that if we were going to go out in the public in any way, that they needed to be involved, and that we may actually have to bring that idea back to the board for their approval, so that Antoinette could then ask the city council to direct the city manager to make CAPE resources available for anything we would do on a public standpoint. So, my plan would be the working group would meet as often as the couple of members that would be part of it during this 90-day interim thing before we all meet again as a board, and we would bring back what we tried and what we learned at that point in time. If we learned anything really remarkable, we would of course get the word out via email to the board members along the way. So I guess I'd take questions at this stage. Oh, one more thing. A working group can be as small as one person, but it must be smaller than a quorum of the board. And so we can only have probably 2 or 3 people on it before we start to get into quorum space. Jeff, you got a question? Got to unmute. Yeah.
Do you have your working group already, or is that something I can help out with?
I'm seeking people who are willing to get involved in this. And
Okay,
if everybody raises their hand, I'll have to privately flip a coin to keep us under the quorum.
understood. But I'm volunteering if that be the case.
Okay. Anybody else want to be on it?
I have a clarifying question real quick.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you were interested in investigating certain areas in which complaint numbers have dropped for the purpose of discovering if the noise issues were solved, as opposed to them just giving up after being, I suppose, what you might consider to be a beleaguered battle of neighbors and sonic warfare or what have you. I'm curious, are you suggesting that you're, and I may have misunderstood that, and if I have, stop me, but are you interested in going and actually going out to areas where complaints have dropped and investigating that with this working group, or did I misunderstand?
So it's a good question. My words frequently are confusing. The example I gave is directly from my experience with the issues that the people who live near Mission have. There are a couple of people, one who 2 years ago couldn't stand it anymore, sold his house and moved to Beaver Dam, but another person who I think constantly interacts with city staff as they try to figure out how to get meaningful measurements there. And when that person reaches out to me, the implication is that their neighbors are still feeling pain, but feel like it's a lost cause to fight the battle. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to encourage those neighbors to write complaints, because Grania and Daniel are doing everything they can to take effective measurements in that region and to come to whatever conclusions that they reach. But I think it would be useful to the board to hear from those people what it is they feel when that noise hits, what's unique about their property, what impact it has on their life, and how they perceive it, which is where I think you might be interested, Carmelo, is how do they perceive the sound when they're sitting in their living room at 9 o'clock at night? Because there is some science there, right? There is some science about sound levels and how they impact people's ability to sleep and things like that, which is where the staff's recommendation that we could conceivably, if it was appropriate, take a meter into their dwelling when they're receiving the sound that is causing them stress, and take some measurements and compare that to international standards for, the impact of sound on stress and that sort of thing. Not hearing loss. None of this is going to hit the 85 decibels, 8 hours a day that OSHA sets inside a factory. So maybe if the working group felt it was appropriate, we would sign our lives away for the meter that the staff has said we could take. And if we thought that was a good way to get a sense of the actual sound levels that were inside somebody's home, and that would give us some clues, we would go do that. But we wouldn't be taking measurements in place of enforcement, because they have the correct procedures and the correctly calibrated gear, that any violation would then be written against. Did that end up answering your question, Camilo?
Yeah, I was just curious as to the scale of such an endeavor, because maybe it was just the way you worded it first as we talked about. But yeah, there's like it, depending on the scale of which that project reaches, like if it's just simply localized to expounding the data through surveys around Mission Hospital and how it affects people and the personal experience of noise, and also like the quantifiable decibel readings that are going into certain areas and everything. Yeah, something like that totally makes sense. I just there's part of my brain saying that we should also we should acknowledge that there's a difference in data collection between surveying and seeking out confirmation bias for any intended output for a given result, and also a consideration within that concerns whether or not such surveys lead people on with questionnaires, and by the way things are framed as well too. And those are very, very serious, risky issues, and worry me not only because even when the results are in and tallied and everything, there might still be some potential problems with surveying in such a way like that. And also, what was the other one I was thinking of? It just escaped me. Yeah, the surveying. Then the other issue was resources and time, and what they should be focused on. Focusing on an area where complaints are going down as opposed to peaking. But I'm just spitballing in response.
That was a miscommunication. I never intended to say that complaints were going down.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
And these resources will be the working group members or any other members of the broader community who would like to participate. So this will not impact city staff resources. Okay, so far it's me and Jeff. If anybody else thinks about this and wants to raise their hand, just let me know. Jeff, I'll work offline with you. I have generally a very, very flexible schedule. I don't know what yours is like at all, but I'm sure we could find a time that fits yours to, brainstorm sort of initial actions. Okay?
Agreed.
Perfect. Thanks.
And to follow that up, I wanted to talk about it seems like we need to continue working on this good neighbor policy and want to continue that as a working group if those that have previously been involved are interested, or if anybody else wants to join in that and continue to hone in this document, but also see about ways that we could potentially get some of this information out, or the best way. If that meant just putting something that was finally approved by the board up on the city website, great. But if there's a way that we could potentially work to get that information more widely accessible through any sort of like media campaign that the city would approve of, then I'd love to look into that as well. So Carmelo, I don't know if you're interested in staying on and continuing to work on that.
Today, that is?
Or just not today, but I mean, just like moving forward over the next few months as we're in between our next meeting on September 12th.
Oh yeah, continuing the working group that we've been doing.
Yeah,
of course, definitely. Yeah. That's we signed up for that responsibility, so we can hammer that out for sure.
Yeah, I feel like we're pretty close to getting that done, and then just looking at ways that we can get that information out there that everybody would agree on.
Absolutely, and I have a bunch of notes today too that we can throw in the mix and cross-reference. Yeah.
Me too. So, and Granier, I don't know if you want to continue to be a part of that, and anybody else is welcome to join that wants to be a part of that. And Jeff, I know you've been a part of that, but I know your time is limited, so if you'd like to just focus on decibel levels with Rick, then I completely understand.
You're muted. I can see how that plays out. So, but
well, yeah,
I want to help.
Okay. Great. Any other questions, comments, anything from you, Charlie? You want to comment?
Well, no, it's kind of a segue. I wanted to make the board aware. This will be my last board meeting. I'm resigning from the NAB. I actually am taking the advice of one of the speakers during the session back in July of 21 that told me as a rich old white, condo owner, I should move out of the city. So I have sold my condo. I am leaving Asheville. And so by default, I'm kind of going away from the board as well. Just some brief perspectives. You probably have some, centricity around some of the things I brought to the table. I will tell you one of the most troubling things that I read in an article recently was actually a city council candidate said that he viewed the core problem of the musicians in the city as the gentrification of Asheville. I'm like, that's a pretty narrow-minded viewpoint. I think, there's a sharing that we should do, whether we own property and contribute to, things that end up being land grants or whatever for building of affordable housing. But to see that sort of thing in print really just kind of dug into me a bit, and I didn't care too much about it. But the sale of my condo came about, out of the blue. I wasn't marketing it. But the gentleman, probably for his benefit, will be, he and his wife will be remote homeowners. But that nonetheless, he was made aware of, sound issues downtown and so on. That was more to keep me out of court as a real estate agent representing myself. But, my points, Jessica, you and Rick and the rest of the board members that I would leave behind is that I honestly don't see this reaching a successful conclusion for 12 to 18 months. And I've already got 12 to 18 months in this dialogue with mostly city council. As I said a little bit earlier, I think, council is really the ones that have to lay this at the feet of. They made the vote on the decibel levels, which I personally feel are too high. That's just one man's perspective. I don't feel like the council is viewing noise in the inner city importantly enough. They obviously have other issues, obviously with homelessness and reparations committees and things of that. And, even the, narrowing down of the 18 or 20 to 4, I think will further dilute, messaging. But I wish my fellow board members well. I probably will hopefully live somewhere in or around the Asheville area, but it won't be downtown. So I wanted to make you aware of that since I'll be transmitting that to City Council later today.
Thanks for letting us know, Charlie. Thanks for your work. All right, we will now check in with Haley Mahoney for public comment.
Thank you, Jessica. Let me just try refreshing my page because the Wi-Fi has been a little slow today, and I just want to make sure that what I'm seeing is accurate. Just take just a second. Yeah, we have no one on the line for public comment.
Okay. Any other last comments from the board? Ben Woody.
So I'm not the board, but just real quickly, first I want to say good meeting today. That was really good discussion by the board. I thought you made some good progress on your dialogue. And then maybe just a reminder, so your working groups can be, like you said this, Rick, but they can be up to 3 of you or as a quorum. So you can have working groups in 3. And while I think it's important that you do the work you've been doing, but also know that as staff, we can be a resource to you and we can help to whatever extent you need our help. And then just to make sure, I guess the plan is for the working groups to report back to the full board in September.
Correct.
Is that kind of Jessica, you may have been planning to summarize that, but just to make sure And actually, maybe we can end the meeting with a summary of like, what are the active working groups? What are the members to this point? And then I guess just verifying that the plan is in September, we'll have those as report outs to the full board. Does that sound right to everybody? I think that sounds right, correct? Yeah. Okay.
That sounds right. Definitely. Thanks, Ben. And, I just want to say that I appreciate everybody being here. Obviously, this is a new board, and this is something that is so nuanced, right? As Rick pointed out earlier, that it's just, there's a lot that goes into dealing with noise and sound and how it's perceived and the complications of it. So, I know this is hard. I know that we sit on different sides of these issues, and that we all want the same thing of being able to live cohesively in the city, doing what we do and having, enjoyable lives. So I appreciate everybody being here and helping to work that out, because, as a saying that my mom used to say all the time is like, things like this are clear as mud. And so it's going to take some time for us to get this figured out. And there's going to be some of this, as we know, right? And there's going to be some, there's going to be some ups and downs with it. So I appreciate everybody's willingness, and Charlie, I know your camera's off, but also appreciate you being a part of this conversation as well, because, it's important to have all these different perspectives. And I'm as challenging as this as this is and is going to continue to be, I feel, we'll do our best to work it out and deal with the kinks along the way as they come. So I appreciate all of you. Haley.
Thank you, Jessica. Just to summarize things, to make sure I have accurate action minutes. So did the sound mitigation working group become the Good Neighbor Policy Working Group, or do we still want to call it sound mitigation? How do we want to handle that?
Good question. I mean, because they're kind of like one and the same. Because it's like our documents be called Being a Good Neighbor and Sound Mitigation Tips. So, I mean, we can just keep the name of the Sound Mitigation Working Group. Let's just keep it as that, since that's what we've been.
Okay. And all the members are staying the same. So we have Jeff, you, and Carmelo, correct, for that working group?
Correct. And Jeff may choose to not stay in that working group in order to work with Rick.
And if you do fall out of that working group, Rick, know that you could step up, and if you wanted to provide some feedback at that point to, avoid the quorum. We can only have 3 max members of the working group at any given time. So just let us know if that's something that you would like to do. And then to confirm, our other working group moving forward is going to be working on decibel levels, and that will be Jeff and Rick. Okay, and you all please reach out as things move forward. Like I said, we can get some decibel readers for you all and maybe help point you in some directions if you feel like those directions are good ones to go. Yes, sir.
So I have one question. Since Charlie has resigned, will there be action to get a replacement, or will a replacement wait until the second year of the group?
This is new for me, so I'm going to be finding out, and I will contact everybody that is a member of the board. I'll just BCC everyone so we don't start a group conversation. But just know that I will be figuring that out, and hopefully to have you answers before the end of the week on what's going on there. I think with the resignation, they post it to the public for an applicant. I think it goes back to the application process and we get a new member. I'm just not 100% on it and want to make sure that I give accurate information to you all.
Okay.
So I will say, I know because I'm on boards and commission, we keep applications on file for a year, and it will likely be re-advertised. And if it's done in a timely fashion, we might be able to have someone appointed by September. But I can't guarantee that, but that's the usual process.
Thank you, Antoinette.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so if there are no objections, we will adjourn this meeting. Any objections? No, hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Our next meeting will be on September 12th. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Good,
you.
good luck with your working groups.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you all.